Hey everyone, I'm Noctis Corvus, but you can call me Noctis. Today's video is one where I look again at a character and the space around them, with the real focus being on the figure. It was meant to be a set of characters, yet, since the other ideas I had for those characters weren't as strong, and doing this one gave me a full-length video, I figured there was no reason I had to do that. So instead we have this. And this wasn't easy in its own way either. It began as one thing, ended as another. So let's just get into the discussion of it here, since I will likely have a bit to say. Starting off, let's follow the chronology of the image, as I often tend to. This time it began as I wanted to create a set of creepy or unsettling characters, with Halloween being so present lately. I toyed with so many ideas for this character set too. I looked at maybe doing things with Halloween creatures like vampires or werewolves, but then decided that I didn't want to do that. I then looked at maybe doing something centred around more eerier themes, like a character for decay or another for withering, as I enjoy single word themes quite a bit, and I also kind of enjoyed how abstract they might have been. Yet exploring that kind of went elsewhere, as I figured there would be a lot to do with each of the themes I came up with. They were very vast and I had multiple ideas that I'd look at, so it wouldn't end up as a single character. So a final attempt at a character set is then where this idea began at the very least. I wanted to turn unsettling environments into characters or creatures. At the time I leant a lot more into the angle of characters, since all of them had sort of non-human details on them, or I kind of thought about maybe adding mythological details to them, but they were still more humanoid than anything. I had to then pick out 3. Misty woods, icy lakes, and graveyards were what I went with. I figured that it was a good range of options, especially since they're all unsettling for various reasons, and I could have looked at them in their own little ways. The woods are creepy at night with things like mist. It's also the idea that they can be isolated, yet have a range of unknown sounds around you. To do with the misty forest, there is also low visibility, and a lot of dangers tied to being in the woods at night. The icy lakes are fairly similar. It's isolating, yet the danger is more apparent. It plays more on the risks of weather and the ideas of the terrain being unforgivable, with things like frostbite at risk. And the lake especially, it can break, crack, and that has its own risks. The graveyard would have then looked at the idea of not being alone, and the feeling of being watched despite it also looking isolated. It would play off the creepiness of it being a final resting place, and sort of the unease that comes alongside all of that. However, the misty forest was the strongest route, and the other 2 didn't quite develop how I wanted them to. They came out boring, too typical, and I had to start back at square one with them a lot, as the ideas weren't right or going anywhere either. The misty forest was different in a way. It had a vast range of ideas and themes that I could follow, and I had more ideas that I initially really knew what to do with. However, even with this, it kind of became a situation where the forest theme began to grow lost between the other themes, and it ended up being where a character or creature based on a forest would be one of the many ways it could have been read as. By this, I mean that there were other ideas that seeped into the development, which did almost change the foundation away from just an environment character. Yet, going back a short way, I started sketching with the idea of the forest in mind and little more. I will be honest up front. I started with little idea where it would go, and I didn't really get much better than that. Very quickly the sketch was regarded as experimental, and the drawing never escaped that reputation. I just kind of started by blocking out shapes that I wanted to use rather than a strict layout for the person, and sketching out proportions like I normally would. I figured out early on that the shapes of the creature would matter more, and if they were slightly off, then it wouldn't be the end of the world, as they weren't strictly human anyway, only the basic shape of one. I also figured out that I could always change it at the end of everything, if I truly came to care about it that much when all was said and all was done. So the first stage had been scribbles. They'd been silhouettes and shapes. I didn't look at detail or anything as a guide, and had been more focused on the general gist of what I would become to working with in the end. Only once I had the shape of the figure, creature, whatever to call them, sorted is when I turned towards the details like if they had a face or not. I mean, in the sketching phase, I didn't even know if part of the outshoots would be hands and arms, or if they'd all be trees. So I kind of had that stage after the initial sketch of just kind of filling in some sections and working out what they were exactly. I knew a lot of these things coming out of the sketch would be branches like trees. I figured that if they were meant to be a creature of the forest, they would have some way of blending in with said environment before approaching a target. The branches then could add to the creature's creepiness. The first sign of them could be the moving branches from the corner of an eye, or something human-shaped within the trees that it was lost. I wasn't sure at first how tree-like I wanted them to be. I mean, really, if I redid this, I may lean more into the non-human side. I would probably go further with it and really see how far I can take this angle, as I did keep it rather light in terms of this. This is also where I started moving away from the Misty Forest influence and decided instead to look at something unsettling instead, that kind of would be more based on a forest. Or something that would live in a forest, I should say. I began to think how it would work, maybe looked again at why they'd be so human if anything at this stage, since I still would have changed it. Yet my logic kind of figured that people lost in a forest would be more inclined to approach something that they think friendly or human at the very least. It may be a move of desperation at the end of the day, yet it would be more likely for something to approach the creature if it looked like one of them, rather than a wild animal. From there I had the bottom part of the design to work out. I had the shadow with a sort of skirt shape, yet the initial intent was that it would fade into a mist like some sort of ghost. Again, a detail from the original theme of a misty woods. But the more I looked at it, I didn't quite like that direction, since I have another idea that I am also developing at the same time with something very similar. There were also just a lot of implications that came into play at that point, and it was a lot to kind of keep track of. It was a creature, a person, and the mist looked like that of a ghost. So it stayed as a sort of dress style of thing, but very torn. I suppose in a way it can still tie into a ghost, or again, play into the aspect of mimicry, if better fitting. Though I also held it as something to kind of change if I came up with a better idea. In the end, however, I didn't change it. The dress stayed, and I simply added the split with the theme of the eye-like shapes, since it was something that kind of worked for the design as well. Those shapes were also a test and experiment from when I was working out what made a forest creepy. I was trying to work out if it was the aspect of isolation that made it unsettling, the lack of direction, or the eyes playing tricks. And it kind of came out to two final contenders too. It was the idea that you know you aren't alone in a forest, even if lost. But the idea is that you're with the wildlife. I would also argue that if you randomly came across someone in the forest at night or in the mist, then there is no situation where it isn't creepy, especially if you're lost. But the main angle had been the idea of the wildlife. From there it was also partly the idea that the eyes will play tricks on you. People will see things in the mist and the dark that aren't there, and a forest can only add to this with all the branches and things that kind of look like a human in the dark. As I have said, if I revisit it, I could change a lot and lean into multiple different angles going forward. I would maybe want to look at making it more creature than human, or more monster really, if I went down that route. This time there was an idea of that. I added the tree branches for this reason and more. Yet I don't think that I was really willing to fully commit. I wanted to start slow and gradually develop it, since I wasn't confident in any of the more unusual design routes I could take with it. I mean, it is something I need to work on myself more than anything, but I do tend to play it safe with designs like this, where I could maybe afford a few more risks. But let's get back to the development process, since there isn't much to say on my own precautions, for now. From the sketch and the details, I wanted to look at how I could make it interesting. This is kind of where I came to sketch in the details like the hair, since I originally also hadn't been sure if I wanted them to have that too. At this point though, I had them about 90% person and maybe 10-ish% creature, so I let myself enjoy adding the details in the hair since it is sometimes my favourite things to add. This time too, I knew it would make more sense if it tangled and interacted with the branches rather than potentially falling loose. Now, in this part of the process, I also kind of need to give a bit more outside context for it, as I didn't sketch it all in one sitting either. See, I had been arguing with it until here and there for a longer while, but it was to a point that I was seeing the design within my dreams and nightmares, but it was something a little bit different each time. One time the tree branches were used as wings, with the hair cropped short and messy. Another, the branches were a skirt, or maybe they were legs, with the creature being more mist, though that one was from other design routes from the get-go. It kind of taught me plenty about how much it was on my mind and how much I needed to work things out when it gets to this point. Yet it highlighted the idea of how the hair would tangle and led me into sketching this. It gave it that bit more interest and appeal that I had been missing up until this point. There was something tying the branches to the person and something keeping everything together when I compared it to it not being there. So I let myself go ahead and wrap and weave the hair and kind of have some fun with it, and kind of again show that the branches are part of the person. That then brings us into the environment part of this image, as I didn't have much to work out for this one. They are based on a forest, so the environment would be a forest, and it actually began as something supporting the character too. It was never really meant to be a focus. As said, this was originally one of 3, so the environment would have been some bushes, trees, and little else for both time and the focal point of the image. When I typically do these character videos, I do 3 in one video, and I tend to just focus on drawing the characters, since that is the most important thing more than anything. So in that idea, the forest and the environment wouldn't have mattered, and it would have been more for something to do if I decided to make the character into a print potentially, or if I just liked them and wanted to fully finish the image. With this one in this instant, it kind of meant that the environment became more part of it, and it became more of a focal point in everything. Especially since the video would focus on just the one instead of the 3. And even in saying that, the environment still was in a supporting role. And to be honest, I kind of think that I used it more as a frame than anything. I kind of used the environment to give the person more context and to kind of highlight the character's place on the page, first and foremost, as there wasn't really much need for fanfare in the environment. The trees at the side frame these really nicely, as it also poses as a good stopping point for where the image would be cropped. And the red plants around it only further it, as they all draw into the person with this context. So with the layout and the sketches sorted, I did need a colour palette at that point. This was another area where I had no clue going into it what I would want. I mean, for the sketch, I looked at a lot of grayscale details for the most part. I wanted at that stage to focus more on the shapes rather than colour, so didn't exactly bother trying to work it all out at once, especially since it helps me more to break down the process. And for that part, the grey worked. It worked so well that I did consider it somewhat for the overall image, since I had also come to sketch in sections with the pale cream colours too. It looked good, and it felt that it might have been fun to work with for some parts of everything, but it also made a little bit of sense since I'd sketched in that. And I would have had to edit parts of it, like certain values, but it was something that I felt would be settling too soon in a way. I hadn't explored my options. So I did play and mess with the colour options. I used the eyedropper to pull a few from the sketch and set them aside, and I even picked a few other tones from the colour palette and the colour wheel that I felt may have worked well, and I thought that I could try and introduce them at some point to it all. Yet, one thing that is very noticeable, it doesn't play out that way. I do start off this stage trying to make it work and trying to work with it quite a few times, yet the palette never got quite far. Nothing seemed to get past certain points, as they just seemed to be uninspired or ended up in a palette that I didn't want to use. So I then made it red and purple, yet that one got changed because I'd used it a lot lately and I wanted something new. I then tried to maybe look at making the palette something different, implementing the use of a hue layer to try and see what other options may work. I liked the teal option, and I felt that it presented well for the hair, so I felt that I might be able to do something with that. But it fell short as it took away from the atmosphere before I even really began to take it seriously, as the main colour was just too bright. I tried again and again off camera for something that may have worked. Anything that would be fun or inspiring too. I didn't want to go back to simple grayscale anymore either, since I wanted to include some element of colour, as that can be where I find my enjoyment. In the end, I kind of combined the two starting ideas. The purple was pushed until it was basically grey and desaturated. It reads as grey with a hint of colour, so that it wasn't too close to the palette I've employed lately, and it is different enough that I would still enjoy it. I then chose red as my main colour. The red tied into the brown for the trees, which pushed this as a forest more than any other option that I may have taken. It also kind of added to the impression overall. It's a bright and strong red that draws the eye and carries the needed connotations and connections in terms of how it may be read. If it was strictly a character for the Misty Forest, I would have been more inclined to change it. I would have gone for grey and greens, with more emphasis on the shadows throughout. Yet because I had been moving more towards it being something else, I felt that the red would be more fun, and also save the green idea for maybe down the line. And that was more for when I want to explore creatures like this in a bit more depth or have more ideas for it. Now, having covered all of that, I usually go into the details here and discuss them for a fair bit. But this time I feel that I have basically done this already, but earlier in the video than normal. Instead this time I do want to touch on the challenges that this image has posed for me. Now, this is something that I would usually opt to avoid or not mention, since it can come across rather negatively when I do. I really don't want to sound like I hate the drawing process, the piece, or anything really, as I don't want to bring it down the tone of the video or potentially sound like I'm ranting about the image either. If I truly hate any piece or outcome, I don't show it. It's shoved into a file and never seen again by the light of day, since I don't like it. But this time I kind of need to mention them in the process, since they definitely affected this outcome, and in a sense it affected my feelings towards it overall. After all, at the end of the process and everything, while I'm writing and editing this script and the video, I have been going back and forth around how I feel about it. One day I like it and I think it's got its merits or something fun to it. The next, I honestly consider scrapping the video and throwing it into the folder, as I don't know if I like it or what I might like about it. It goes between these 2 points, and it's taken me a fair while longer compared to normal to settle about how I feel for it. And really I think this is down to 2 main reasons, as there were 2 ways that the challenges presented themselves. One of them is in terms of the process itself, and one is more due to the ideas that I had been working on at the moment, and I do kind of want to touch on and discuss both, as they feel important to mention. So for all the challenges relating to the process, I do kind of need to give a bit of background context to all of this, which is what I will be discussing first. So one little fact about me is that I've always struggled with insomnia. It goes back as far as I can remember, and it's something that I just come to expect at certain times every now and then, especially since I've never found a method around it. Sometimes it's less noticed, and I can still go about a normal day with a mostly normal night of sleep, and kind of go on like nothing ever happened. Yet recently, it's been a couple of weeks where I haven't really been going to sleep until late, after staring at the ceilings for a few more hours, and I have then been waking up quite early. So, in short, I have been working off maybe less than normal hours of sleep. Again, normally it's not a problem. In fact, I barely notice a difference, so I never mention it as it doesn't affect anything. Yet, this time I sort of realised that I had been forgetting a few basics in terms of processes and art. It ties into the process issues which came up in terms of shading quite significantly, since I actually forgot for a good few days how I would usually shade this idea, or what I thought it should look like. It sat as the flat image for so long since I just didn't have a clue when picking up my pen how the light and shadows should work, and I just kind of left it at that point and did other tasks until I realised that I couldn't put this off anymore. In the end, I worked it out. At least I think I did. It just took me longer when compared to normal, and I kind of struggled to find the flow that I usually get in with projects like this. There had been a few attempts at certain sections that ended up cut from the video altogether, and it took almost double my usual time with it all. In this instance, the uncertainty over the drawing could have been avoided. Seeing the final piece for me of any project will kind of remind me how the creation of it went. With this one, it's likely carrying over some misplaced frustration, and that would be because it took more than normal since the issue continued until after I finished this. I don't want to go into it too deeply as it's not something I often will mention, but sleeping can lead to a range of things for me that I kind of know and expect to handle. In this instance, the uncertainty in the process was a major challenge for this outcome, as I also had less focus to continue working on it for a while. It almost ended up unfinished because I couldn't make sense of how it should work otherwise for shading. But once I worked through it, I was quite satisfied with it since I could call it done, and I would have called it done. I did like where it ended up, and I did agree that I'd worked on it as much as I could before things began looking overdone or overworked. So I still called it done, and I do still call it done when this comes out. The remaining back and forth, it's more just a memory of the challenge with the shading or parts of me wanting perfection to reflect on. When, in a way, perfection was never a goal for this image, so it makes little sense in that regard. I think in terms of my second issue, that one has been because I've been giving myself too much to improve on and work on lately. The more I draw, the more I sort of pick out my own flaws and the areas that I want to improve on for the sake of myself more than anything. That, as of late, is perspective, poses, creatures, animals, merging human and non-human, and the list is really ongoing. I do think strongly that it isn't just something I do myself. A lot of artists will look at always trying to improve, and I see no issue with it. That, honestly, wasn't why I struggled with this outcome. Yet, in this piece in particular, a lot of these ideas began trying to seep in, and I was trying to work on most of these things at once, all in one drawing. I'd been trying to think about perspective, maybe pushing the character away in the trees and drawing that, and then also put emphasis on the character and making them more creatures. At one point I thought the pose was the issue and tied that in until it almost became this page in my sketchbook that just highlighted what I'm not happy with at the moment, rather than the usual enjoyment that I have with it. In the end, I just went simple. I kept it simple and stopped caring almost to force myself out of that focus. Improvement is good, don't get me wrong. It's something that can be fun and interesting, and it opens doors to ideas that you otherwise wouldn't be able to follow. At least not follow in the same way you want to. Yet fixating on the flaws and errors, not accepting any drawing until it progresses everything less than perfect, is just, in a sense, unhealthy. Part of this was also because I hadn't slept. I know this on reflection. But I know that the issues I had finishing the drawing had been a strange sense of guilt with myself, that I said I would work to improve these areas for myself and nobody else. And then I just didn't with the next drawing, even though this one began as a simple character concept. I ended up finishing this drawing as a reminder to myself more than anything. Every drawing doesn't always need to be the best I've ever done, and it doesn't need to consider everything perfect. I can have fun, look at ideas before anything, and kind of just go with what I want to do, rather than forcing development that isn't ready to happen yet. Yes, I wanted this character to be a creature, and I ended up with something mostly human. But it was fun, and it was a small step. I have sketches now for more creature-like things that I can pursue if I ever decide to, but nothing said that I had to go with that lane. And this one was more fun for what I wanted to do here. It prompted me towards new ideas that go more into the realm of creature, and I can kind of look at them on my own time with little steps, rather than having to rush large ones. Perspective? That one isn't part of this image at all. Yet, if I had included it, I could have done something cool that made it more visually interesting or closer to the artist's work that I admire myself. But for now, this is what I enjoyed. In a way, I got to look at framing in my work, but not in the way that I thought I would develop it. I instead let myself have fun with the plants and the leaves around the side, and I could make it interesting before sensible. The red plants work to border everything, and okay, shading them the first time made some of the leaves look a bit more like tongues than anything, so I had to change that. But it fit the piece in the end without drawing anything away from it. I could also gain from it by revisiting the blurring experiment from the Hourglass and Seasons video, and this time was a bit more successful than that one was. I kind of could employ it and it didn't look out of place. All of that is to kind of say that no, I didn't progress everything that I wanted to improve on in this drawing, but I got further with some areas, even if they were more baby steps than anything, but progress is still something that I could be happy with, rather than getting caught up on what I struggle with or maybe the idea that I could do better. One thing that I have learnt, always going for something better or improving means that you never actually get anything done. If I got this image done, to the flat stage or shaded, then I decided that I had a better idea, I could start it and go back to the start. I could use that to develop more of the creature and the ideas relating to that section so that it was further along. But then I would never finish the piece of this. Especially if I did that every single time until I thought that it could never get any better. And then if I did it every time until I thought it couldn't get any better, then I'd never have a drawing to show for it. At the moment, I have sketches for more creative creature variants that kind of come from this image's starting point. I also have some that kind of came up during the midpoint of this drawing and right at the end. I have some that came after it. But at the same time, I also have this drawing to show for it, and those sketches are entirely different and nearly unrecognisable to this one, so they can work as their own ideas for a later date of another project. And in the meantime, I still have this one. I suppose to summarise the challenges, I could have gotten caught up on them and stopped. I could have lied in the script and said all was perfect, easy and fun. But the challenges made the image what it is, and kind of coloured how I felt about it for a while after finishing it. Yet that doesn't mean that I hate it. It's simple and a reminder almost that not everything has to be better and better. Making something fun has no shame to it, and I can use that extra energy that I have from this one to kind of work on the small sketches that may otherwise improve the wanted areas away from it in the background. Now, with all of that said, that is all we have time for today, as we kind of come up on the time limit here. I do want to say though, I mentioned a lot about the issues and the challenges. I still like the outcome quite a bit. It's fun even though I knew when drawing it that I have done stuff close to it before. I mean, it could quite easily fit alongside the older drawings I've done of Wrath or Pride from that other set that I did. Admittedly, I already look at that set though and see how to improve them. But they have been fun just like this one has been, and this one might sit alongside it, but it doesn't make this drawing any worse for that. I do personally prioritise my enjoyment of this sort of art too. So I do hope you liked it for whatever reason, and that I didn't put anything off by going into the challenges. I tried to keep it more positive and focusing on the process, but this one kind of needed that feature and the context too, as it played a lot into the development and how the drawing came out. For now though, tell me what you think and have a wonderful day. I hope to see you next time, but for now, and today, goodbye.